the tree coordinator and part of the communications team secretary.
And Deborah?
I'm a member of the board.
Catherine? Kat?
Sorry, member of the board.
Okay, who else is on? Is Rick on? Let's see, Rick.
Yeah, I'm on here. I was trying to hook up on my other computer, but I canceled that request. I got another laptop which actually has a camera, so you can see who I am.
Okay. Let's see, who else have anybody else on the board that I missed? Manuel is on the board.
Hi, Manuel Bonastro.
And Peggy is about to be on the board. I'm still working on her. Okay, I think we should start the whole agenda. Have you got everybody in who wants to be in? And
Everybody is coming in as a
Wow.
yeah, everybody's being let in as they show up.
okay. Let me just yeah, I'm hoping that I'm not going to have any trouble with my connection, but let me just do this. Okay, so what we want to do tonight is the first item on the agenda is to talk about the proposed changes to the general plan. So we'll have about half an hour for that, and then that might slip a little bit. We'll see how it goes. Then we want to talk about Aggie Square and the proposed subsidy, hopefully for about another 20 or 30 minutes. And then we will have an update on construction at UC Davis, and we will have I think an update on Stockton Boulevard. Can people hear me okay?
I can.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can, okay. So, because my screen kind of froze there for a second, but hopefully I'm not going to have, I'm just going to turn my computer off, my other computer off, so that I don't have any interference, and hopefully that will work better. So let me do that. Okay. All right, I'm just going to shut that off. Okay, so we've got Councilmember Guerra with us. We're glad you're with us tonight. And I think what the best thing to do here, we will start with the proposed general plan. And I really encourage people to put questions in the chat. So everybody just locate the chat, and please, as we go along, put your questions in there. So Councilmember Guerra, again, thanks for coming. You have what? So we have you have
Also, everybody who isn't
a letter
intending to
with our
speak should
concerns
mute
about
themselves. Everybody who isn't intending to speak should mute themselves, because we get a lot
Manuel,
of
can you
background
just
noise.
mute everybody? I think that's probably easier. Yeah. So we've expressed several concerns to you about the proposed general plan land use element, and we'd like you to speak to those. I'll just briefly summarize them. There's the impact on single family neighborhoods. There's the question of that this doesn't seem to provide affordable housing. There's the social justice issue, there's a NIMBYism issue, and there's environmental impact. So those things are all addressed in our letter. So Eric, why don't you go ahead and speak to that for a little bit, and then we will take questions.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks everyone. It's great to be here with the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association. It's got a sunny day at Coloma, at the Coloma Center here with this fun backdrop. I do also encourage everyone to use the chat box here too. I'll put my contact information right off the bat, Guerra@cityofsacramento.org. Thank you for those, some of you have reached out to me. We've been getting a lot of emails for a lot of issues. There's a lot going on in the city. The first thing I'll say about the general plan, about Aggie Square, about the Stockton Boulevard update is none of these are items working individually or in isolation. All of these pieces we're working in tandem together. So they all fit together in our effort, our overall effort to address many of the challenges that we see in the city. And let me just start off by saying a couple things. One, the issues that we see in the city are clearly the issues of lack of affordable housing. We still see some issues with the lack of investment on Stockton Boulevard revitalization. We see major challenges also, particularly with the pandemic, about employment opportunities. How are we supporting the missing middle in our city, and how are we making opportunities for everyone in there? So I think that in that context, I think it's important to start that conversation off. I've had a chance to read your letter, and I've also had a chance to see some of the comments and listen to folks and see some of the comments in the news. Let's start off by one key misnomer here, that this somehow proposal eliminates all single family zoning. And in fact, that's a fallacy. In fact, most of the city is still single family zoning. But one thing that is very clear is that we have a challenge for a lot of families to find that transition in between the types of housing and that affordability. So what is this proposal? What is actually happening in the general plan? Well, and what's the timeline too? Because there seems to be this concern about urgency. So the 2040 general plan, we still have quite a fair bit to go. So this is a good opportunity to be outreaching to the public. Tomorrow we'll be, or on the 19th, we'll be reviewing the draft of it. But to start off with, I think it's important that everyone stay engaged. Over the last year, we've held a number of community meetings, stakeholder groups, over thousands of responses that we've had about the general plan on this issue. And I'm going to put up the link here in the chat box on how to stay engaged, because
you know what, Eric, Eric, I want to interrupt you. Eric,
yes,
we don't have a lot of time, and we were hoping was that you would really speak to the issues that we have raised to you. And so let me be more specific.
okay.
We met with city planners. They said this proposal would allow duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes on any lot in a single family zoning district. That means it's no longer single family. So that's
incorrect.
That's pretty definitive. So I'd like you to speak to that. I mean,
sure.
And let me just finish too. We've seen here in Elmhurst that houses are being purchased and flipped. That's happening a lot. It's happening in our neighborhood. It's happening in Oak Park. It's happening in Tahoe Park. And if this provision of the general plan goes through, what that means is that those will be flipped to duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, which will significantly increase the density in our neighborhood. And of course, if one person does a fourplex and the next person and the next person. And so I think these are very specific concerns. So can you speak to them?
Well, first, I will argue and tell you that I disagree with that point of reference, that it doesn't do that. And not only that, when you're talking about houses being flipped as well, people are upgrading their homes all the time. These homes, particularly in Elmhurst, were built in the 1920s. My own home was built in the 1950s, and they go through a natural place of repair. So this, and I also will dispute that.
Wait a minute, Eric, are you saying
me,
that
Maggie.
the general plan, we were told by, let's just, okay,
Maggie, let me finish.
Let's speak to the issue here. We were told by planners that the land use would allow duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes on any single family lot. Can you speak to that?
Yes, the zoning plan would allow
That's what we were told.
Variety of that, duplexes, single family housing, and whatnot. Now that already happens here. That already happens in Elmhurst. And I actually want to take a step back here with a little bit of history, because when Elmhurst was built out in 1929, in the 1930s, it was zoned with multifamily housing as well, with no restrictions on these. And it wasn't until 1956 And this is, and you can look this up with the Center for Sacramento History. That's when it was rezoned R1. And, interestingly, in the 1950s, in the 1960s, that coincides with a lot of planning policies. And to your question about, how does this deal with racial equity and all of these issues? It also coincides with a lot of planning actions that created more segregation in our communities. So I think first, specifically for Elmhurst, the community was already zoned and planned out with that in mind. And that has never happened, that you never saw that happen in its history. If you look at other communities.
Well, okay,
like
let me,
Tahoe
Eric,
Park
again,
and-
let me
and-
interrupt you because currently you cannot come into Elmhurst and create a triplex. You can do it through the ADU provisions, which is another issue, but you cannot build a fourplex or a triplex or duplex on every single lot in Elmhurst. And so I think you need to be upfront about that is what city planners told us.
And here's the reality is that will likely never happen. I mean, and the zoning plans are intended to give us more options and more flexibility. And the fact is, even in the pocket area, yes, there have been homes where they built out what they called half plexes and sold those half out, but they still have to follow the design guidelines. They still have to follow the same character of the issues. And I honestly take this offense to this type of almost scare type of tactics on these letters that all of a sudden we're going to level out communities for this type of options. What this really does, what the planning does, is give options for us to figure out when there is an opportunity available where we can build out more units for our city. That's what it really comes down to. So to bring to a finer point, that's what it does. Now, 70% of our city is already single family. It's already built out. There is an unlikelihood that will ever happen. So to that exact point. And I want to go back to a finer point. I mean, whether you like it or not, the fact that our zoning practices since the 60s have created these kind of inequities, those are the realities. And part of our effort since 2019, when we started down the path of the general plan, was to try to address these inequities. And part of addressing those inequities is by providing opportunities for more options. Now, is there a need for a missing middle? Yeah, we have to do that. And are there places where we want to build more affordable housing? Yes, and that was part of your questions in the letter. And we are doing that as part of the Stockton Boulevard plan. But the this missing middle housing addresses the fact that not everyone is going to live in or want to live or in an apartment complex or an affordable housing complex. There needs to be options for people to go in. So that's what the general plan is about. And I want to still remind folks that all of the design requirements, the height limits, the distances, all of those issues are still going to be required. Now, there was a concern that you brought up about, well, wouldn't a variance kind of get around that? Variances can be applied all the time for right now in the city. So a variance still has to go through a public process and a process in itself. So again, I will say that I disagree with the premises of your statements. But I want to hear investors already overbuilt SFR to law.
I think
So I was trying to catch up with some of these questions, Megan.
I missed that. What was that?
I was trying to catch up to some of the questions here. But I think to the most important question here is, there's a fear that we're going to eliminate all single family housing or to destroy single family neighborhoods. Well, one, that's not what the general plan does. And two, I think that the premise that we're destroying single family neighborhoods by allowing duplexes in your neighborhood, is a bit divisionist. And I do think that neighborhoods, and I strongly believe that neighborhoods that have a balanced mix of income are good neighborhoods. But I do have the city planners here today also to ask more detailed questions as well. I think Matt Hurdle joined us here today. But let's start off there.
I think that, Eric, I think there is a concern, and we've seen this in Midtown, that you open the door to this, to tearing down houses or converting them to fourplexes, and that's what the neighborhood will be. This is a neighborhood with narrow streets and limited infrastructure. The other things here, I think that, so the truth is, this opens the door to have multifamily units anywhere in Elmhurst. That is the truth of what this would do. It would not provide more affordable housing because there are no provisions in it. And it would eliminate home ownership opportunities. So instead of having home ownership, you would have more renters.
Well, let's go. I'm glad you bring up that point. Well, the reason we don't have affordability is because we have a lack of supply and a lack of variety of supply. If the only thing you can buy at your car lot is an Escalade, what kind of options are there? That's unsustainable. So the reason why many cities, including Sacramento, have gotten into this situation is because we don't have the options of a variety of single family homes at different sizes as well. I started off in a 2-bedroom house in Tahoe Park. Now we were able to find one with 2 bathrooms, but that we were able to move up there. But I didn't get to a 2-bedroom house until before I was able to live in a smaller townhouse. The fact is, we don't have that variety of options, and it's basic economics 101. Anybody that's gone to community college will tell you that the fact that we don't have that supply is causing that problem. And we can't just go out and build massive affordable housing projects because those are also income restricted. Therefore, on the extremely low income, we need to build more affordable housing for our extremely low income and low income. But our missing middle, our teachers, are having a tough time finding a place because we don't have supply. So the important thing is that this general plan affects the entire city. If we want to address affordability, it's not going to be from 1 2-mile stretch of a neighborhood. It has to be a plan that affects the entire city, that gives us affordability throughout the entire city. And it means a mixture of things. It means federal planning and zoning. It means investment in areas where we can build affordable housing, like the projects on Stockton Boulevard. One of the questions that were asked was, can you talk about what the investments that are happening down the boulevard? And we could talk about that in more detail later. But that's over 600 units of affordable housing that we're trying to build, not missing middle housing, which is folks who want to live in duplexes or triplexes.
Yeah, there's some other questions here about affordable housing. And so I guess you can look on the chat. But I do think it is important to realize that this is rental housing. It's not there's not controls on it, and that it decreases homeownership opportunity, because what you do is you take away homes and you put rentals in, and those are investors who don't necessarily live in the neighborhood, may or may not keep up their property. So this really, anyway, why don't you look at the questions and see what else
I
is on
understand
there.
your point there, but I also take offense to that, that all renters will deteriorate the property. Yes, we do. And we do have a rental.
That's not what I said.
Well, that's what was implied here. At least that's the way I said it.
It was absentee
investors, not
landlords.
renters.
That's the issue.
And that
I'm
is true.
sorry,
We have a rental inspection program for
Yeah.
that kind of issue. And so to folks who do have absentee landlords, please reach out to the office, because we will go to the point of even filing a civil injunction on an absentee landlord that's continued to not protect their property. And we've worked with some of the folks in Elmhurst on those issues too. But let me go back to some of the questions here. Let's see. The geo. The geo here, yes. And I think the geo is an unfair example of affordable housing, because the affordable housing that we look at and we try to support are built by affordable housing developers. Now, the geo was purchased at a commercial building that was a vacant AT&T building that in a commercial spot. So that I think is an unfair comparison. And those costs and those prices are high. Yes, they are. And there's a lot of issues why those developments are high. You can go into a whole dissertation about what the cost of construction is happening in the state. But the issue about how do we build more, how do we make affordability happen? It's building more, so working with the affordable housing developers to build the permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, but also increasing the supply of these missing middle duplexes. Now, we want to protect the character of communities. Yes, we do, but we also need to balance what our overall city needs are. So let me see, I'm seeing a lot of statements here, but less questions. I'm gonna go, does the plan say if there's someone that builds a duplex, does it have to be a rental? No, it does not have to be a rental. Again, there are different products. So one of the things that I will about housing product type, I've really encouraged that any development happening in District 6 to push the developers to look at different types, homes with yards, so homes without backyards, townhouses, different sizes. We need to be able to have what is called affordability by design, basically building homes and building products that have a different cost so that they can have a different pricing to it. If we only build things that have a high cost to it, the price will always be high when the demand is low. So we have to build with affordability by design to be able to have inclusive neighborhoods. Let's see, diverse housing options don't equal affordability. That's correct. When we have a lack of supply, that's why you have half plexes that are 300 grand. But if we have more options, that's what'll determine, what the costs are. Let's see, I'm going through here. So to some of the more questions. Do you sell? Do you sell?
I think one thing, Eric, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Ask the question while I'm trying to read this question because I don't quite understand it here.
Well, I think the concept here of we know that you cannot build your way out of affordable housing. Sacramento is also in a position now where lots of people are moving here from the Bay Area. So there is no guarantee that and I'm going to use the term, getting rid of single family zoning, which is what this does, that's going to provide housing for people that live here. It's not going to provide housing opportunities. It's not going to provide more affordable housing. People from the Bay Area are moving up constantly. So what it will do is make neighborhoods more dense, and people that actually want single family housing will have to move out of the city. And I don't think that's a good solution because then you increase commuting.
Well, I disagree with that.
This
I
isn't
disagree with
about
that point. In
affordable
fact,
housing. It needs to be clear. This is not about affordable housing.
Every aspect of what we do is linked together. If anybody thinks that solving affordable housing is one silver bullet, it's a fallacy. In order to address our affordability issue, I'll go back to it. It's everything that's combined. So when we talk about what's happening on Stockton Boulevard, the general plan, how do we look at zoning in the future? And the fact is, R1 zoning and the practice that we've continued over decades has led to higher commutes. So I will dispute your argument that by doing this, it'll actually increase greenhouse gas emissions, because it allows more people to actually live in areas closer to where they work, because not everybody has the income to live closer to where they work. So, the folks who are janitors, who are maintenance workers, who are not doctors, work at SMUD, at UC Davis Medical Center, at some of the county buildings and state buildings, we want them to be able to live where we do too. If not, they will be moving to Yuba City in cheaper, sprawled out areas, and then commuting to Sacramento, which is the major employment center. So I also believe that we have to do this from an environmental.
No guarantee this would do that.
There are no guarantees in life. All we could do is do good planning. And that's what the general plan, 2040 plan, tries to do, is to try to do good planning so that we can try to get ahead of these issues. And that's why it's an important document that everyone be engaged in, and that we don't rush it. I mean, again, this plan is going to be before us until 2020, and it doesn't get approved till 2022. So there's a number of hearings. Tuesday is the first one. And important things that can be brought up about, design elements, looking at issues of parking. I know people feel strongly about parking. one way or the other. But those are all factors that can be taken as we develop the plan. So January 19th, let's see, it's being rushed. So why is it being heard on January 19th? Actually, this was supposed to be heard last November. We actually delayed it and kicked it over another month. But we've had a number of town halls on this. We've brought it up to, we do regular distributions of information about how to participate. And again, I want to paste in here the contact information to where you can stay informed. It's not that, I think it's important that folks stay connected on the general plan. In fact, when I was involved with the Tahoe Park Neighborhood Association, that was kind of one of the biggest things I always pushed our neighbors to get involved with. So one, I agree, I appreciate everyone being involved today, because that's how we make.
We'll put that link up, Eric.
Oh, good, thank you.
We'll put that link on the website too. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. And there's an email sign up. I think I encourage everyone to also sign up for the emails, because if, you know, I mean, not everybody checks the
What's the
website
question?
regularly.
Why don't you?
Maggie, sorry, you cut out there. I think I lost you, Maggie.
There's a question here about, if this plan passes and someone proposes a triplex or fourplex that neighbors object to, what avenues do neighbors have to give input, I guess?
Yeah, whenever there's a question for a variance or a design standard, you can contact the city department, and again, it would still maintain the same size and distance requirements as we have now. So the issue that this does, let me see, I'm trying to find the planning here. Matt, are you on the line? I'm trying to find your contact information or the way for people to.
Councilmember, yes, I'm here.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, do you want to answer that question here so that we can move on to the next one here?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How do people participate in if they have an issue with a particular development, to say someone's going to build next to their house?
Well, I think we know the answer to that, Eric. You have to go down, you have to show up at hearings, so the neighbors have to be vigilant about that, and they may get heard and they may not get heard. So we've been through that process here with the proposed rezoning to commercial of a property here. So we know that means that neighbors have to fight City Hall, basically, because the
but even with the
inclination here tends to be
rezoning
to
of
support the developers.
Even with the rezoning, we required that the neighborhood association and surrounding neighbors are notified. I mean, that is, and in fact, I'm the one at the request of the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association that increased the distance requirement for neighbors to be notified, so that we have a higher number of neighbors when there's a change. But we still require, when there are major changes, for the neighborhoods to be notified, particularly those that are adjacent to it.
Can I ask a question? Because
Can you
I was
answer
the
the
one who
last
did the original.
Question, will the
Can I ask one quickly?
triplex, fourplexes, right? Yeah.
Sorry, there was
Well,
a
in
people speaking
terms
over each
of
other.
democratically
Last
run
question here,
meetings
Eric.
and stack, I think Antonio was waiting to speak. So Antonio, will you please?
People should put their comments in the chat, but there's some other questions here, Eric. Do you want to go back to those?
Yeah, let's go back. Or which questions would you like here? Because I think we've been trying to catch up here with some of them.
Maggie, before you go on, I just want to make sure that
Well,
folks
how about,
understand
will the triplex, duplex, fourplexes be by right? Will there be any room for neighborhood input?
In the current draft of the 2020 plan, it would be by right. Matt, can you talk about any kind of dispute process here?
Sure, yeah, and I just want to clarify for folks where we are in the general plan process. It's a 3-year process. We're about 2 years into it. And so this is the end of phase 2, moving into phase 3, where we actually draft the documents. So what we're asking council to consider on the 19th is the key strategies that are the foundation of the document so that we can begin the environmental analysis and move on to actually drafting. So you'll see the next phase in the summertime, we'll have the draft playing out in the streets, we'll have workshops, and that you'll be able to see the specific policy language, the draft, the final land use map, etc. And that provides the foundation for these changes to take place. Then we would need to update the zoning code to allow these things to happen. And so in terms of all our development in the city, it depends on the type of project, but if you are consistent with the development standards, so the height, the setbacks, the lot coverage, if you're consistent with the design standards, those kinds of things, then you would have to, it'd be administrative or ministerial process to go through. Now, if you're going through what you guys are asking about variances, yeah, there's a process for that. Projects requesting deviations to lot coverage requirements or other things would need to go director level public hearing. And I can put the section of the code in the chat for you. And then there would be an early notification sign and there would be email sent out, public hearing, etc. So it's a difference between developments that are consistent with our general plan and our zoning code and our design. That usually goes through the process on staff level. Or if you're looking to do something different, like a rezone or a deviation, then there would be more of a public hearing process.
That public hearing process is either a zoning administrator or a planning commission appeal or at that level. Is that correct, Matt?
For a deviation of this type, it would be usually a director level, but it is a publicly noticed hearing and community can participate.
Good. There's more. Okay, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. So again, we try to create as many avenues for public engagement and as possible. Great. So Maggie, I think there's some people who want to speak. I don't know how you want to manage this here.
Can you answer these questions? The last, I like the one here. There's still a question here about what people can actually do under this general plan proposed. So the duplexes, the triplexes, the fourplexes, if they could get them by right. If they vary from the setbacks, then people could do it with a variance. So I think, I hope that question got answered. Oh, there's another thing. Elmhurst is already high rental. Is there a cap on how many lots can be flipped?
No, there's no, well, one, anybody can flip
You
a
see that
house
question?
today, there's no limit on, what somebody does to their property before they sell it. See, the proposed.
So there's no, with this general plan, the question here about, is there a limit on the percentage of multiplexes? The answer to that would be no, right?
Right. And no one
Under
is
the
saying
general
that.
plan.
That is correct. And the point again, every lot is different. Every lot size in our city is different because the city was built out at different times. There's still these design requirements. So depending on the lot size and depending on where it's at is going to dictate, if something needs a variance or if it's going to go through a higher scrutiny. So it's hard to say that, everything is going to just be by right and people are going to be able to build 4 rows of multiplexes because again, we're trying to create a general plan that has a process for the entire city, a city that's got history of over 100 years. So that is a general question, but I think Matt put a finer point to it, that there is different levels of approval that still occur.
Maggie, I want to flag
This
a question.
plan would allow, and then I think maybe we can take a few last questions, but the plan would allow for a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex on every single lot in Elmhurst. In theory, it would.
This plan would allow in any part of the city that type of opportunity. Now, I'm going to go to point out a couple of the comments here that I've seen here, and there are definitely folks who have talked about their concern that their homes are going to be purchased or their neighbor's going to sell their home, and it's going to be leveled and duplexed or triplexed. And, you know, for one, I think that is unrealistic. But two, it's still, the question I ask is, why are we fearing having more options for the diversity of our community? The fact is, the people who have the ability to move in here from the Bay Area or others they're coming, you know, or other places. They're coming and they're buying in every parts of the region, not just Sacramento. I mean, let me just put it that way. In the important here that I should think about is, what are we doing to allow our community to be able to stay in Sacramento? I mean, that is how we're able to do is to address that issue. If my son decides to be a public servant or to be a teacher that is not considered, that's not supposed to be low income, but can't afford to, you know, to stay in Sacramento, I think that would be a travesty, because we have to make options for the future of our Sacramentans to be able to have here. And I do agree with some of the comments here that, you know, that we shouldn't be fearing diverse neighborhoods. We shouldn't be fearing that. I had a good conversation with one of your neighbors about the concerns about, you know, would this impact their property values and how some folks have put their assets in their land. And I'll tell you that my family, we've got most of our assets in our property. You know, we were immigrants and farm workers, and we went and purchased our home, and that is our for most of my family, our biggest asset. Do I think that this proposal in the general plan will change that? No, because all you have to do is go to Land Park and see the value of over $500,000 homes next to duplexes and quadruplexes for that point in that area. So the facts have not borne out that way. But what this does do is it provides us options when there is space available, and given the space that we have in lot lines in the areas, it's all going to be dependent on a case-by-case scenario, which is going to put a lot of work on our staff here, but that's what it takes when things like this happen. So let's see, because we're getting here on the 30 minutes. Before I move on, I'm going to look at if there are other questions here. Maggie, are there questions that we missed here?
Why don't you go back to some of these other questions that the discussion is missing the damage of overbuilding infill can do to neighborhood social cohesion. And there's some more questions in there.
Okay, let's see. Go back, repeat that. You said something about, no, about cohesion, the damage.
708.
Oh, 708. That's a good way of doing it, actually.
708. Yeah.
Yeah, the damage of overbuilding. Well, yeah, first of all, we've had a terrible track record of doing actual infill building in our city. The only real place that it's started to occur is in the core of the city. And partly because of the cost of construction. So one, I don't think that we've even gotten to a realistic point of infill that I think is acceptable. But two, that's where our entire general plan, and not a general plan, but our entire region is trying to design to do more infill building, to try to look at our vacant areas. And frankly, our areas of opportunity are more along our commercial corridors, like Stockton Boulevard, Franklin Boulevard, Del Paso. So where do you really see more infill building? It'll be in areas that actually really need some in business. And is there a damage to social cohesion? I think there's a damage to social cohesion, frankly, when we have segregated communities based on income. The fact that kids, if they don't know that other families have different challenges and struggles, is a terrible thing. I think we are a better society when we understand each other's differences in life and experiences. So to me, one of the reasons I do enjoy the communities of Elmhurst, Tahoe Park, the Colonials, Heights, Manors, and Village is that they were built originally with a lot of diversity and housing in mind. larger homes that are 4.2s, some that are 2.1s, some that are apartments and duplexes on the corner lots. It created an ability for everyone of different incomes to live together. And if we continue to create communities and cities that are completely segregated, we're going to continue to have the issues that we saw this last week in our country. I mean, that kind, I personally feel that kind of planning over the last decades that created communities of haves and have-nots have led to the divisiveness in our country as part of it. So I'll just close this by saying on that aspect to say that if we really want to move the needle on the challenges that we're facing socially, then we've got to start looking at all aspects of how we run a city, including how we plan our city out. We have to think about that. And again, no one's talking about eliminating single family neighborhoods. We're talking about creating more options for that missing middle income in our city.
Maggie, a quick question. I just
Yeah, go
want to get
ahead.
this answered to Eric and to Matt both. Matt, the meeting we had with you, and Eric, I agree completely. I would like to see a lot more diversity in my neighborhood. I think it's ridiculous the price of my house, which I would consider a starter home, that no one could afford that as a starter home. That aside, Matt, what I took from the meeting we had with you, and maybe I'm mistaken, was that my 4,000 square foot lot, which is a very small lot with a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 1,000 foot house, a very small house, this lot could be built 4 stories, 4,000 square feet. And then that is, I don't know what you call it. It's not a variance.
Right,
That can happen to any lot in our neighborhood. That is what I was told. Is that correct?
It's not
And it doesn't
quite-
have to be a duplex. It could be a single family home.
Sure. And so I apologize in advance because it's pretty complex planning issues, but it's not quite accurate. So I'm going to try and do my best to simplify it and tell you what the steps are. So there are 4 things that kind of control the land use, what you can do on your parcel from planning. It starts with what's called a land use designation. So what can I do on my parcel? So where, your home, for example, so it's a residential parcel. Right now you can have a house, you can have residences there, right? So we're going to have in our map, you'll see on the 19th City Council, we're going to have 11 different colors around our city. Majority of the city, as Eric noted, will be this yellow color. It's residential, right? So it's residential uses. There will also be, so it's basically residential serving uses there. Then there's the next thing, which is intensity. How much of that use can be on a parcel? And so right now we use, it's confusing, but we use density, how many units per acre. For this new general plan, we'll be using what's called floor area ratio. So that is how much of a lot could be built up. Now when I give that example of a lot that's 50 by 100 feet, so that's a standard lot size in your traditional neighborhoods, like a land park, East Sacramento, 50 feet on the street frontage, 100 feet in the back. So with the FAR of 1, which is what we're proposing for all residential, that's the lowest FAR that we're proposing in the city, goes all the way up to 15. Downtown Central City be FAR 15, all our neighborhoods will be 1. So if you did the math, theoretically under a floor area ratio, you could not exceed 5,000 square feet. But let me clarify that, because that's just the one layer. You also have to be consistent with the planning and development code standards. And this is why it's confusing. Title 17, it's our code, our zoning code. So in our zoning code, right now for residential, for example, you can't exceed 40% of the lot coverage. So if your lot maximum would be 5,000, you couldn't exceed 40% of that, or up to a maximum of 2,500 square feet. And you can't exceed 35 height max. So right now
Unless you get a variance.
That's what it is in your neighborhood now, 35 feet max. Plus you have to have 20 feet away from the street. You have to have 15 feet from your back fence. You have to have 5 feet from each house. So I know it's complicated and nuanced, but that's the third piece. And the fourth piece is the design. So we have citywide design standards that you have to follow. So you have to follow all 4 of those pieces in order to have successful development. So when Eric said it's a little bit case by case, it is a little bit case by case. Now, the proposed key strategy that we're asking council to consider would be to allow this up to duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes in residential neighborhoods, but you still have to follow the development standards, and there would still have to be considerations. Heights, for example, I know parking was an issue. Right now in all our neighborhoods, you have to have at least 1 parking spot per unit. So if that didn't change, if you had a fourplex, you'd have to have 4 off-street parking spaces. So, there's a lot of regulation and standards that are in place. And so it's a little bit of a complex issue, and I apologize for that, but that's just, how planning works. So I try to simplify for that.
Well, the thing here, though, people can get variances. There also is parking being waived if you're half a mile from a light rail station. So in the case of Elmhurst, that's a much more complex issue. I don't know if we should move on to the other topic, but I think that the point here is, and we can see this, we see lot coverages in our neighborhood now that are over 40%. We see very intense development that has gone down in Midtown. So I think the fact that, people can get variances, and I think we'd have to look at even allowing the fourplex, the impact of that. So I think we have to be upfront here. This is a fundamental character change to this neighborhood and to any single family neighborhood. Now, I still don't think, and we'll move on, but I don't think you've justified that this is going to create more affordable housing, probably would create more rental housing. That's true. It's not necessarily going to undo discrimination because there's still an economic barrier, which has been pointed out, and it is going to have a drastic effect on the neighborhoods, which is what I think some people have been asking and saying, these buildings go in, it's definitely going to change the character of the neighborhood. So I think, Eric, maybe you can put your email up there and people can continue to give you feedback. Is there anybody
So
here who?
my email's at the first one comment on the what do you call it, on the chat here. So if you want to get back to it, but I'll go back to this point here. A fourplex with the amount of off-street parking that would be required would probably not ever happen in Elmhurst because of the restrictions on parking and the size of the lots. I mean, first of all. So again, I'm going back to these points. Everything, we still have design standards. We still have all those issues. You can get a variance now. So the concerns about overbuilding or getting out of those getting out of the design standards, it's something that if you have a concern with about variances, you should be fearful now then, because that's still a process. So I don't think that, I think they're red herring issues. But here's one thing I do want folks to do is to comment on the things that you're concerned about so that we can try to work through those over the next issue to figure out, okay, what are the parking issues? Because I saw some of those comments here. I'm concerned about over parking, and whether it's going to be crowd the street, particularly narrow areas where we have narrow streets. Well, those are important things. Bring those up to me or to Matt here. Matt, could you put your email in the chat box too, so that we can connect those? The other thing too, you should notice is many families are starting to go into trying to figure out how to do single car households. There's a movement of our residents that are trying to change a lifestyle. Now, not everybody's there. Some people like their 2-car per household lifestyle, and they have but many are trying to go to 1-car or no car households. So there is also a shift in what products and what kind of standards of living you want, and we should respect that there are different interests in folks. Now, the question about affordability, I'm going to talk about housing affordability, because it's not just about affordable housing; it's about housing affordability. The fact that even to buy a home, sometimes the mortgage is over 60% of someone's income is a problem, and that's a problem because that affects a family's ability to provide for other things, enrichment things for their kids, for other resources to move on. So it isn't about just building affordable housing. It's about housing affordability. So I'm going to switch that on there. And that means that we have to have a variety of not just apartments, not just of mixed duplexes and triplexes. We have to have a variety of also single family housing built. And because if we continue to push for the Natoma style big ranch lots or other places, it's devastating to the environment. People are spending more than they need to because that's the only thing that they have to choose from. So I'll leave it there, because all of this conversation is about choice. It's about opportunities. And so, and the general plan and 2040 plan intends to try to address that question.
Okay. Well, and I don't think it does, but I think we've got enough comments here. I did put up Eric's email, and maybe you can do that again, Eric. So we did want to, and I think this discussion is very critical, and it has to do with what our neighborhood's going to look like. So, and it has to do with a lot of other issues that Eric mentions as well. So why don't we take a few of the Aggie Square questions, Eric, if we can switch gears. The first one here is, do you have those questions, Eric?
Yep.
You have them? You're muted. Eric, you're muted.
Sorry about that. There we go. Yes, I do have them. Yeah,
Okay.
and so we could either read them, or do you want me to just go through them for sake of time?
Yeah. Why don't you do that?
Okay, let's see. Question one. While we understand that the EIFD mechanism for Aggie Square subsidy, we continue to have questions. One, the University of California owns UCD Medical Center land. They currently pay no taxes to the city of Sacramento, although clearly it utilizes and benefits from resources that Sacramento taxpayers fund, including streets, public transportation, etc. Wexford is presumably going to make considerable money from Aggie Square's lease. So why is the city funding the infrastructure cost? UC is a constitutionally independent entity with vast financial resources. Why doesn't Wexford get the money from them? Well, UC Davis is leasing the land to Wexford, first of all. And UC Davis will be paying rent on those properties that they occupy. So they're going to be covering their expenses. The rest of the project, and that's an important thing to distinction, there's a public part of the project and there's a private part of the project, is where the funding gap is. Now, the city sees this as an opportunity for more economic activity, for more construction jobs, for fulfilling some of the goals that we want to meet, which means meeting all of the economic goals for developing our commercial corridor. So this project in itself, the city sees as an investment. And if we look at other projects like Centene, the reality is we almost lost Centene, which meant all those jobs that we had here to begin with at a smaller number, we're going to move also, unfortunately, to Texas. So the city engaged in that opportunity to try to maintain them here. So there is a likelihood that this developer says, you know what, we want to go somewhere else and choose somewhere else. Well, that is one opportunity. But the other issue I think here that comes to play is by us getting involved in this and understanding that there is a funding gap, we also have leverage over the project. The point of the question here is UC is constitutionally independent, which means that they could, if they had the money to do everything, could do everything without even discussing it with the city, our neighbors, the county, or even the state legislature, because they're constitutionally independent. But we do have an opportunity now, because there is a funding gap, to have skin in the game and put some pressure on the things we need by being part of this process. So I'll put that question there. The second is, are the properties that currently pay property tax included in the EIFD? Which ones and why are they being included? So as was mentioned earlier, a lot of the property is all UC property, which is state property, which doesn't pay any property tax. But there are a few parcels there that are owned by Shriners, Ken Fon's group, private end holdings, and then the corner lot where Louis used to be at, and the Jack in the Box. Those three owners own a number of parcels, 7 parcels in total, that are in this project. And the reason they're in that EIFD is because there is potential for the development to invest in that. And by putting them in the EIFD, we can capture the gains as a city for those from those developments. If we don't put them in there and there is investment in there, then we don't capture those gains for what we're trying to achieve there. Question number 3. Articles in the Sacramento Bee have said,
you know what, Eric, can we just, before you go through all these, can we see if people had comments about the answer to the first question, which is, I mean, do we really need to be subsidizing this developer? I don't know if people have comments about that. Maybe rather than just kind of whipping through these, we can see if people have questions they want to ask. So does anybody have the first point was, you know, why are we subsidizing this developer and why are we subsidizing UC? I mean, you're saying we're doing that to provide leverage. Or do other people have questions about that? So maybe let's just give a break so people can ask questions if they want.
Sure. Well, let me clear to that point as someone asked the question. One, without the investment right now and without the EIFD, there is no project. So there aren't any benefits of any type other than the status quo. And then the other question was, well, I'll leave it at
Because you're
that.
saying that Wexworth won't do the project. UC Davis won't do
Correct.
Aggie Square without.
There is
the subsidy.
currently a funding gap that means that the project will not be built if that funding gap is not met. Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat box.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so again, and the benefit though is that by creating an EIFD, we actually get to control any future gains, and part of what our goal is to focus those gains and a portion of those gains into building affordable housing. Now, this is true affordable housing. Those of extremely low income, and extremely low income, and then what's called a workforce housing. So question number 3 relates to this. Articles in the Sacramento Bee have said that along with the $30 million from the EIFT, so you referred to it in the question here as a tax break. It isn't a tax break. They still pay their taxes, but we put that money back into the project. So that includes $37 million plan to spark more affordable housing surrounding Aggie Square. According to the city's consultant, John Dangberg, that is true. We have been told that the city's share of the possessory interest tax on Aggie Square, $30 million for Wexford infrastructure, would come from the 80% of that share, and 20% of that share would be affordable housing. So where does the 37 million come from? Okay, so Leslie, correct me if I'm wrong here. So again, the 80% of what is collected will be that 30 million to fill the funding gap. The 20% that over the life of the project there in present value is the money for affordable housing. And that number is that 37 million. Is that correct, Leslie?
That's right. That represents the 20%. So your question was right in that it's 80% for the gap in the project for infrastructure, and then 20% will be used for affordable housing, not included on Aggie Square campus. So it's really to promote other affordable housing elsewhere in the area, including and primarily along Stockton Boulevard.
Exactly. So the benefit here is that we can actually capture money that would never be created without this project, because that's state land and it doesn't generate any tax revenue. But again, by the project and the EIFD, we actually can keep that money local. It stays in the area, and we can use it to build affordable housing. And we do have a number of projects on Stockton Boulevard right now that have a funding gap, that have a gap financing need to be able to actually get them off the ground and going. So let me move on to the next question here. Let's see.
Will bonds be issued? Yeah.
Yes, bonds. Will bonds be issued to finance the infrastructure? And if so, what happens if the EIV doesn't raise enough money to pay for the bonds? Well, first of all, the only thing that's going to be paid for here is the infrastructure, and it'll be paid for based upon the agreement to build components of the project. So it'll be in phases. Could bonds be issued? Yes, they could. We haven't confirmed whether we would or not. But one, we would never issue bonds if we couldn't pay for them, because the bond financiers are going to require proof of the ability to pay before that we could even sell those bonds. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg question here. I'm not a bond finance expert, but Leslie, you financed a lot of affordable housing projects. Leslie Fritchie is from our city's economic development department, for those that know. But Leslie, did I get that right, or am I incorrect?
No, that's absolutely right. So we would, if we issue bonds, it's based upon revenue generated from the project. We couldn't be in a position to issue bonds in advance of knowing what that revenue is. So that bond sizing would depend upon the revenue generated by the project, plain and simple.
Perfect. Good.
But
good.
bonds are a possibility. Issue
Bonds-
are possible.
Bonds are a possibility funded by the EIFD revenues, yes.
Now, the EIFD is a relatively new tool, so we're still figuring out how that tool will probably play out in the bond market, and that's maybe a better question for our city treasurer, who's in the business of trying to convince people to buy the city's bonds. But the other issue, I think, when it relates to the infrastructure, is that the Wexford, the developer, will have to front the debt for the infrastructure. We will pay after the fact, and they'll have to carry that debt in their gap financing. Is that correct, Leslie?
Yeah, I really want to underscore this point because I think there is some confusion. So the developer, Wexford, is fronting the money for the project and will be paid back from the revenues from the project, from the EIFD. So we will not reimburse them unless they actually do what they say and repay them on an incremental basis, unless, as you just mentioned, unless we do a bond, and then we would do a lump sum payment to them. But as it is currently envisioned, it would be reimbursement over time, but they actually front the funds.
Yeah, so Wexford is really actually is taking a bigger risk in here if we move forward with this project. But again, this is an opportunity that I think we have with this new tool, the EIFD, the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District, the financing authority, to be able to not only cover and get the project moving, but also control a chunk of that revenue that's coming in for our needs, which is affordable housing. And I think Rick Hamilton had a question here that I want to make sure I get to about affordable housing and where it goes in our city. But I want to make sure I get through. I think there's one last question left. Major question.
There's three, I think, but
three. Okay.
Yeah, and Eric, there's let me just give you one other one. Somebody raised in the chat to comment on the Sacramento investment without displacement. So if you could comment on that as well.
Sure. Let's see, Sacramento. Can you give me the timestamp? Does ENA share any of the concerns expressed by and embodied in their lawsuit with Sacramento? Well, I mean, that's for, I think, Maggie probably to discuss, but I will say that I have heard from neighbors, and I agree that we need to be vigilant about addressing any impact from any development project, whether it's this one or any other, such as the transportation issues, such as the housing issues, such as and even obviously in Elmhurst, it's always been you're adjacent to the property. So the question about right now we're trying to work with your organization and making sure that the university is following the flight paths for their helicopters, that's an ongoing thing. So with any development, we're going to try to address those issues. And I know folks in the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association have talked about their concerns about the cost of housing and how the cost of housing is going up and whatnot, which is also why, again, we need a mixture of housing. So the more we have more options of different types of housing throughout the entire city, not just in one neighborhood, but the entire city, is an important thing. So let me go back to the questions here. The impacts on Aggie Square. Some of the neighbors are concerned regarding Aggie Square having the effects of air quality, traffic, parking. Yes, and I want to paraphrase it because it's a very long one here. What are we doing to address the issues of traffic, parking, and air quality issues? Well, I currently sit on the Air Quality Management District, and I'm the current chair of the Air Quality Management District. So as a chair, I asked the Air Pollution Control Officer to do its due diligence and review the project and comment on the project. Now, wasn't me to interfere on what the Air District was going to say, but for the experts to do their job. And they did recommend that to address air quality impacts in the region from the growth of a project, they submitted three suggestions: build more housing locally for the workforce, provide transportation management plans and tools so that the employees have options other than driving to the area, and obviously encourage more biking and other non-vehicular work, which is important. This is an important factor because we are working on as part of our transportation policies to make sure that the project has a transportation mitigation plan for every leasee. So when a new business comes in, they come in with their offering their employees options other than driving here. The other important thing is local hire. One of the key things that we want out of this project and in drafting the community benefits agreement and the agreement with Wexford, which is why having leverage is important, is that we want them to hire locally so that they're hiring from our community, because we know people who live locally will likely have the option to bike to work and not drive to work or walk to work in that aspect. The other piece of that is making sure that also our streets are walkable and bikeable. So right now our traffic department is working on the Stockton Boulevard master plan, specific plan, and also the Vision Zero plan. Both of those plans together, along with our efforts on Aggie Square, are intended to improve the Stockton and Broadway corridor to make sure that we have more bike lane access, separated bike lane access, and that part of the development we're commenting to make sure that that design allows that, more walkability for that area, and then fixing that intersection, which has been a challenge, doing green striping, signalization about when people can walk through, using smart, what's called the new technology of camera sensors for our intersections. We started using that help vehicles slow down at that intersection. So there is a tremendous amount of work that is happening already on the transportation side, but all of those pieces are important in working together on addressing that factor. Let me go back here.
Yeah, and
there's two more that I want to open
we
it back up.
Eric, probably need to wrap this up just because we have another presentation, but it looks like the last two questions deal with rent controls.
Housing.
What are we doing about, protecting renters, and then a couple projects about questions about Stockton Boulevard housing.
Perfect. Okay, so we talked a lot about cost of housing and whatnot. We do have rent control in the city. We passed rent control in the city of Sacramento last summer, which led then later to the legislature copying almost, the same language in later on that fall, and it was signed by the governor. And since then, we've actually changed our rules to follow the state's rent control ordinance. I think on affordable housing, we've talked a lot about it.
It doesn't affect single family though units,
It does not affect, no, it does not affect single housing, which again, is why we need a variety of housing options. Again, not everybody can afford a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, double car, 3-car garage home. We need a variety of housing options for that. Now, we will not build our way out for folks on the lowest income, which is why we need affordable housing construction. Let's not confuse the two issues of housing affordability and affordable housing construction. We have over 600 units that are planned already in 4 different sites. There's the Donner site, which is behind the Marshall School on 8th Avenue and Stockton Boulevard. There's also that'll be an affordable housing site. There's a development on 9th Avenue and 10th Avenue on the 2 vacant lots next to the Colonial Heights Library, Colonial Theater, the Colonial Theater. And that's going to be a combination of a little over 100 units between both of those sites. It would be built at the same time. That's intended to be more of a catalyst for that area. I'd love to see that area become like a little mini walkable area where that theater and those businesses become much more active. And then further south, over once you get to Lawrence Drive by the John's Furniture site near La Superior supermarket, Mercy Housing is going to build 200 units of mixed income housing from extremely low, which means people who are experiencing homelessness, to low income housing, to affordable housing in that site there, to a blended community of affordability. And that'll be more of a mixture of suburban type and duplex, more like townhouse type of homes there. And then further south on Fruit Ridge and Young Street off of Stockton Boulevard, the old San Juan Motel property. We just went out to bid. I worked on a piece of legislation with Senator Pan that I drafted to be able to get that site to be used for affordable housing. And now that will be also affordable housing for those that are extremely low income. Again, folks who are at the almost homeless level to workforce housing. And that project is kind of exciting because not only will be over 100 units, but it'll be built with a childcare center and a workforce center and a community center. So the Sacramento Employment Training Agency, and we've also talked to Hacker Labs to build there a workforce training center so that folks who are low income can not only have the childcare they need, but also the workforce training they need to be able to bring themselves up and work themselves out. So a lot is happening on Stockton
Can you kind of
Boulevard.
wrap it up? Because we have another presentation, sorry.
Sure. That sounds good, Maggie. Again, we've got a lot happening there. We're building a lot because we need a lot and at different income levels. And I think that's the important thing. We need a lot in the affordable housing side, but we've got a lot on the different income levels. So that's what I have there. We will be talking about and doing more of our outreach on the Stockton Boulevard plan and developing Stockton Boulevard. But all of this, I'll close again with what I started with. It's all linked together. The general plan, Aggie Square, the transportation plan, Vision Zero, the specific plan on Stockton Boulevard, and more recently, the homeless master plan that the mayor talked about. And I'll be getting people information about how to participate on that effort, because that'll include also the housing bonds to try to help spur more of this construction development. So a lot going on there. I'll close off, Maggie, by putting in here my email address one more time and our office number there.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And I think based on the interest, I think that we maybe should look at another forum addressing the general plan and certainly Aggie Square. So why don't we see if we can schedule something like that where we have a little more time to do it, and appreciate your being here today. And I've encouraged people, if they had a comment and they didn't put it in the chat, please put it in the chat and we will share the chat with Eric and try to respond to the comments. So thank you. And our next presentation is
I'm
about
sorry,
construction at UC Davis. So
I'm sorry, before you go there, I just do want to give a little advertisement because there are some community forums related to Aggie Square that are coming up. And so we'll make sure that the Elmhurst Neighborhood Association get them. They're starting on January the 20th. There'll be one on the 20th, 27th, and 3rd. So just to let you know, there's some ongoing forums that are upcoming related to Aggie Square. So
yeah,
just
thank you. And we will put those on the homepage of the ENA website so that people can access that. So thank you again, Eric.
Thank you, Ms. Maggie.
And again, I think we should probably do another forum because I think there's a lot of comments. And so do we have our folks from UC Davis here?
Yes, we do. This is Matt Dulcich with UC Davis, and I think I could get us started. I just want to make sure my audio is working okay for you.
We can hear you, Matt.
Great. Thank you, Joel. And what I'll do first is introduce our team. With us tonight, we have Laura Nisnik-Williams from UC Davis Government and Community Relations, along with Joel Swift from UC Davis Facilities Design and Construction, Jill Tomczyk, UC Davis Facilities Design and Construction, and Ingrid Stromberg, UC Davis Campus Urban Planner. And for me, I'm Matt Dulcich, UC Davis Environmental Planning and Government Relations. So I want to say hello to everyone tonight and thank you to Leslie for pointing out the upcoming sort of Aggie Square community meetings that are coming up. Some of them will be organized by topical issue and might be housing, might be workforce, might be transportation, but those will be, I think, interesting updates that will continue some of the conversation we've been hearing tonight. And then also thank you to Councilmember Guerra. Your enthusiasm and expertise are really amazing. So I had trained myself this evening to try and talk slow, but I also get excited and I might drift into your level of enthusiasm. So really energizing to hear your kind of planning ideas and a lot of the great items that are happening for housing in the neighborhood. So for this update, we had wanted to come to this neighborhood association meeting and provide an overview of some of the recent planning that's been going on for the Sacramento campus. And I'll do a brief overview, and then Joel and Jill can get into some more of the details. And if Ingrid is available to share our first slide, it's kind of the same slide that's behind Joel right there. This infographic is an overview of our long-range development plan, and a long-range development plan, or LRDP, is the typical university process for the equivalent of what a city would do as their general plan. It really is our idea of how we will anticipate growth, anticipate new facilities, and plan for major infrastructure in the next 10 to 20 years. And we completed that LRDP, an update to it, in November of this year. And the primary item that was under consideration with that LRDP was, well, there were two. One was Aggie Square, and the Regents have approved the design of the Aggie Square project. And then the other was the ongoing seismic safety efforts for the hospital. The state of California has really mandated that, with our awareness about earthquakes in California, that hospitals be designed not just to remain standing, but also to remain operational after a major earthquake event. And many hospitals throughout the region and throughout the state are going through these major renovations in their hospital systems to achieve seismic safety in accordance with the state standards. We've completed some of those improvements on the campus and are continuing with the next phase of planning for that seismic safety. And the next phase is a new hospital tower. And we had, both in 2019 and early 2020, been talking about that new hospital tower and have called it the replacement hospital tower. We had thought that we would have finished the planning and design for it in 2020, but with COVID, we paused and really did a reality check on overall regional healthcare needs and our own planning for this major new hospital tower to verify whether we were, with COVID and the emergence of new ideas about a pandemic and regional collaboration in response to a pandemic, the need for ICU beds, whether we were really designing the best hospital tower to meet the not just 5-year needs, but the 10, 20, 40, 60-year needs, where we expect this building to be a prime contributor to regional healthcare needs. So we paused on the replacement hospital tower, and we are restarting that. So for this neighborhood association meeting, we really did want to highlight that as a key project. And then later on in this presentation, we'll touch on some of the other projects that are either near the north edge of the campus or further south towards the south edge. And I'll just hand this over to Joel in a minute, Joel and Jill. The infographic that you can see on the screen right now has in colorized zones the UC Davis Sacramento campus, the land that we actually own. And that north slanted edge is V Street, and then the pink arterials are labeled as going north-south, Stockton Boulevard, east-west down there, Broadway, with the blue area showing our main hospital zone and the existing hospital, and then the education core in pink, and then down in yellow is the proposed Aggie Square area and some of the other projects that might come along with that. And then orange is the what we call patient care and research, and that's off more to the east. So with that as an overview, I will hand it over to Joel, and we have planned this presentation to take questions and answers at the end. So if you can stick with us, I think there's a lot of information we will cover kind of proactively, and then we'll want to really hear your concerns, issues, and I hopefully plan for another session at the one of the future neighborhood association meetings. So again, thank you very much. I'm Matt Dulcich. I'm going to wrap up, and Joel, if you want to take over and cover
yes, absolutely.
the tower.
Yeah, and I won't spend too much time. We've talked about this before, but I will point out some key things. First of all, thank you to ENA. Both Laura and I have had so many presentations with you and some great conversation. It was great to hear the spirited conversation with the city. I will say one of the thresholds that Councilmember Guerra has brought forward, as well as the staff, as we are really collaborating so much better with the city right now. And this LRDP that you're seeing here, traffic is an issue. We definitely have a TDM plan. We have that as a topic that we're trying to address. And how do you address it, recognizing you still have to bring people to your campus? How do you not overbuild it? How do you really rely on that? How do you not impact the neighbors? This is something that's really hot for all of us. So I think it's a great conversation. Just in general, and Matt did touch on it, I'm going to let Jill talk specifically about the bed tower, because it has evolved. And I will say it hasn't so much evolved from health perspective, because we knew all along we needed to have more beds to serve our community. We know the demographics of our city, of our community, our region. The pandemic really woke up everybody else, frankly, to realize that we need more ICUs. And it's terrible that we're even having this conversation right now, but we need it in our city, in our state. And when Jill took this to Regents twice last year, that was the resounding direction from our elected board. I mean, our board, which is the Board of Regents, is more than elected, which is, no, you need to think of a larger facility with more ICUs, with more capacity to serve the entire community. How does that look? So what we're presenting, we're talking about is a model, and it is still within all of our planning, which actually goes back to the 2010 LRDP, so it's actually not even new. So I think with that, Ingrid, if you can go to the next slide, we can talk about this. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about it many more times. From just the framework, I want to say that we really have a stronger plan of our landscape connectivity to our communities, in particular Elmhurst, and how we actually really revitalize some of our connectivity in our open spaces. That's something that Ingrid's been involved in. She can share a little bit about that. But when we talk about the vision, this is not terribly different than what we've had before. We've always had to replace surface parking with structured parking just to compress and get more buildings in. Maybe you go to the next slide. And I'm trying to move quickly, and I apologize, but I know we're short on time. This is really the core of the bed tower, and maybe this is a good point for Jill to introduce herself, talk a little bit about what her team's working with. We're definitely working with the boundaries that were set in 2010 and now with the 2020 LRDP, and how do we expand our hospital. And where it says new green, I will say that is where our north-south wing, the oldest portion of the hospital, which must come down, well, actually gets vacated in 2022, and we'll bring down right after that. Our goal is to bring that in as open space for the community, for our employees, for our patients. There's a couple other demolition, which includes the Cypress building and house staff. So all that's happening in the next couple of years. But maybe, Jill, you can take it from here and talk a little bit about your experience working with the Regents and really what that direction was, because it really did head us in the direction we're heading right now.
Sure. And good evening, everyone. My name is Jill Tomczyk. I'm an architect, but I also work with facilities planning and design, and I'm heading up this replacement hospital tower project. So the blue sort of J-shape RHT diagram you see there in the site plan is how the tower is going to sit on the site. So if you're familiar with that site, that end of the hospital right now is the emergency department, and we're connecting directly to it. So there's some, in terms of planning, there's a lot of synergy with putting the center of gravity of the hospital toward this east end, where all of the adult patient care as well as emergency services will be at this end of the hospital once the tower is built. And Joel referenced the Regents meeting where they challenged us to build more ICU level capable beds. And really what that's doing is replacing existing double occupancy, old standardized beds, some from the 1980s, 1990s era, and bring them really up to speed in terms of high technology and also a standard of care of today's patient care. So at the end of the day, what we'll end up with in building a new 400 bed tower is the ability to replace what currently in our inventory is about a third of the rooms that are single occupancy and capable of providing an ICU level care. And instead we'll have over half of the rooms in the entire facility be ICU level capable care and also single occupancy rooms. So from a patient services point of view, and also the capacity to handle, whether it's a pandemic or otherwise, the ability to handle a higher level of ICU care, this project will bring that. Joel, did you want me to go into any of the site considerations?
Yeah, keep going. I'll respond to some of the comments like Rick's comment right now as we keep moving. So go ahead and just in order of time, that'll keep it running smoothly.
Okay, and just glancing at what's in the chat, one of the things we're considering is the fact that this building will now really hug the edges of 45th and X Street. So that creates a new edge to the hospital. The main entrance, as if you've been there and you understand it now, in that circular entrance in the front will remain the same. The new edge that we're building really will be the extreme east side of the hospital, and it will be the new ED entrance. We are just getting into planning this month, schematic design planning. So we've done programming and we understand what needs to go into the box. Now we actually need to plan where the entrances are, how all the spaces on the interior relate to each other, exactly what orientation some of those spaces on the interior will look like. But as it exists today, the ED entrance and the ambulance drop-off bays will be relocated. So there'll be a significant amount of time while this tower is under construction, where we will be moving both the walk-in entrance to the ED and the ambulance entrance to the north and south sides of the building, just to get them out of the way so we can construct the building itself, the tower. At the end of the day, in 2030, the new entrance to the ED, as well as secondary entrances along that east edge, will exist. 45th Street is still a main point of access for ambulances, but there will be a new turnaround there, similar in a location to where it is today, so that's not really being modified all that greatly. It creates a whole lot, Ingrid may want to add some information here, but it creates a whole lot of outdoor opportunities as the building interfaces both with 45th Street and also with the existing campus on the south side of the hospital. So both for staff experience, patient experience, families visiting, it creates a much different environment that's a little more welcoming than it is today. Ingrid, did you want to add anything about the landscape or the edges down at the
Sure.
45th and X?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. So this has been a really interesting and challenging process so far, even just in terms of understanding how the program fits in the site in a way that is respectful both of campus and of the neighbors as well. But we're really excited by the way it's coming together. So as Jill mentioned, it really meets 45th Street and meets X Street in a different way than we really have across campus. So this becomes more of a kind of pedestrian oriented space, easier to see coming in, creating quite a nice little courtyard in front of the hospital. So that becomes another space for people to use. But it also gives us the opportunity to treat 45th Street differently, particularly as it meets V Street. Understanding that there won't be through traffic for vehicles in the future, just as there is not now. Making it look more part of the landscape while still allowing emergency vehicle access if there's a fire or something like that. But really making it a welcoming place for the patients, for staff, and for the neighborhood, really, as we transition from campus back to the neighborhood. And then pulling that kind of pedestrian-oriented landscape, down in front of the hospital tower, and then all the way down 45th Street and really connecting it all the way back to Aggie Square. So making 45th Street into a really comfortable, easy to navigate pedestrian-oriented street in the longer term, and the hospital and the construction of the hospital itself becomes kind of the northern terminus of that and one of the main impetuses for that movement.
Yeah, and Rick had a great question. What I will say just for me and for Ingrid, we've been really looking at this. Again, the pandemic really raised some issues. Our staff need outdoor spaces too. So we are looking at that last piece of 45th just south of V Street and trying to think about how do we make that more of a pedestrian open space that happens to be a fire lane should there be an emergency. And that's something we're working with the city and our own internal planners to really, hate to say it, I would love to get rid of those wonderful plastic barriers.
That's great.
So,
And then Joel,
yeah,
I think we were going to mention the some of the planning for height of the tower, sort of the current concepts of what that range could be.
Sure. For context, if you're familiar with that edge, the Davis Tower is about, it's 14 stories, but 13 floors. The new tower is anticipated to be somewhere right around 15 to 16 floors. That includes the roof penthouse that has mechanical equipment, et cetera, on it. So that is the tallest portion of the tower. It steps down as it comes around the corner near to the entrance right now, on the leg of the J shape diagram that you see on the screen right now.
That's great, Jill. And then the other issue we did want to touch on is helicopters. And it was mentioned earlier, we know that this summer we've had an escalation in complaints about helicopter noise. And that's really re-alerted us in this planning effort to the replacement hospital tower and its needs for service from helicopters, and kind of the planning that we would entertain to place those helipads on the top of the tower, and really in a more thorough way study the noise effects of those helicopters. So one upcoming item will be our CEQA review, our environmental review of the replacement hospital tower. And that will start with first a 30-day public comment period on the scoping effort of kind of the question of, well, what should we study? What feedback do you have from the neighbors on what should we study? And then when we issue the draft EIR months from then, a very robust noise analysis. And between now and then, we anticipate wanting to talk more with ENA about our noise analysis, the structure of and methodology of that analysis, and some of our early findings on that. So we did want to mention that as an upcoming item in relation to replacement hospital tower.
I was going to add, and I know we're tight on time, and that is definitely one of those studies. It certainly is one of those pieces that we have to be addressed. And I will say, just so folks on this call understand, there are multiple companies that bring helicopters to any hospital, and we don't control them directly. We have to find mechanisms to do that. So that conversation is really critical. The other thing that's come up, and it's in different forms, another is traffic and transportation. In our LRDP, we've identified multiple sites for parking structures. 4 is under construction now. Jill will be studying 5, which is adjacent to that. We're really strengthening the 48th Street pedestrian bike link as sort of in between those areas. And then we're really looking at the traffic and the conversations on X Street. And ultimately, it's a watershed to Stockton. So that's where we have a lot of conversations with the city on how we make that work. And then what do we do to mitigate that? And what do we do to, the first best thing is to have people not drive. And I totally agree with Councilmember Guerra. And if we can get more and more people to be in our neighborhoods and walk and ride a bike and come to work without driving a car, every person we can have do that, and it helps them, it helps the air quality, helps us. So it is a thing that really is something we're working on all of our things. And there's a question, bicycle access from V Street to hospital, UC area, maintain, absolutely. We are working, thank you, Stephen, that's a good question. We are, we're tied in with the same transportation planners as the city, and we network into the city's bike network, and there's a lot of, every connection point is the same, and so we'll keep working on that. And another question just rolled up, I'm just answering as they fly. We closed the ACC parking garage exit onto 48th Street. Exit onto 48th Street. I believe, yeah, thank you. I was thinking that's 49th. Well, presently, the only exit onto 49th Street is a one-way in now. It comes in off of 48th with Ice Center, and that will definitely stay on 48th. On 49th, we're really working on how do you come out of that garage and make sure people go south. It's been a battle, as we all know. And what do we do with the edge as each of the roads hit V Street? So it's a process, but one scenario is that we do have folks come out only southbound, and then they find their way back out wherever their destination is. And on the question of the height of the parking structures, that's a long answer, but the LRDP steps the height of requirements depending on your distance from the setback. We can talk about that down the road, but essentially parking structure 4 sort of is the standard, if you will. They step at different heights as you get further away.
I think you missed a question in there, 804.
804, let's see, what is that?
It seemed to me the UCD randomized the helicopter approaches. Did you get that?
Yeah, I'm going to let Laura maybe chase that one a little bit. Like I said, the biggest thing is our level of control of that, and how do we make sure that those providers come in from, if you will, the south, and that's the difficulty that we have, because whenever they don't, that's when you folks hear it. One thing is they're going to be coming in at a little bit higher, roughly 2 to 3 floors higher, for what that's worth, because they're not going to come down quite as low. And a question on the Cypress parking lot, it's a similar thing. We have really, you're way ahead of us on this, but the master plan does show a similar structure on Cypress. That building, the current building is 3 stories and it's within like 6 feet of the property line. So as we readjust in this diagram that is on the screen now, there's a landscape buffer that literally pushes any structure back as we do these developments.
I think we're going to have to wrap this up. So maybe if anybody else has questions, if you can throw them in the chat now, because we do have another presentation, one more about Stockton Boulevard. So thank you guys. Joel, it looks like you got a couple more questions. Total height of the parking structure. I thought you answered that, but
yeah, and then we'll
anything
come
else
back
you
soon. We
missed?
can answer these questions. I don't want to take up more of your time. But as Matt said, there's a process coming forward in the next couple of months. So in a way, we're advertising too, because we want to continue to have good conversation.
Well, and we really appreciate your coming, and we appreciate that, you've been available and responsive. And I see there that Laura has put down a email. So I would encourage people to, we'll post that too, so that if people do have more questions, they can contact you directly. So there's one, what's the timing for scoping for the new replacement hospital?
Yeah, I'll take that one as we wrap up. This is Matt Dulcich. Scoping is the environmental review kind of kickoff process, and we anticipate that beginning in late January. And it's a 30-day process where we're really open to public comments from agencies or the public, and we will use some of our existing email lists that include ENA and individuals from ENA as we advertise the start of that scoping effort.
All right, well, thank you. And again, I think this, as the presentation with Councilmember Guerra, we want to continue to have you guys come and talk to us. And so we appreciate your doing that. And I think we'll just get it scheduled again so that people can ask these questions about what's going on, because obviously the Med Center has a huge impact on Elmhurst. So thank you again. And I would just say to people who are here, if you have any more questions, throw them in the chat and we'll pass them on. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Peggy to introduce the next presenter. Thank you guys again.
Thank you so much.
Drew, are you still there? I know you were here earlier.
I am still here, absolutely.
Thank you for hanging on. So everybody, this is Drew Hart. He is the, transportation program analyst at the city of Sacramento. And I think you're the project manager, aren't you, for the Stockton?
I
Boulevard?
am, yeah.
Yes,
I
for
am.
the Stockton Boulevard traffic update plan. Okay, go ahead, Drew.
Okay, do you mind if I share my screen? Is that all right?
That's great.
Hey, thank you for letting me come and attend. I know that you've had a lot of information thrown at you, so I will, I'll do my best to simplify and hit the highlights, and feel free to ask questions along the way. Like Peggy said, I'm the project manager for an effort managed by the city to look at Stockton Boulevard and traffic safety on Stockton Boulevard from Alhambra down to 47th Avenue. And the fact that this is all happening around the same time as UC Davis and Aggie Square development is serendipitous. We've been wanting to study this corridor and in particular a couple of key intersections for many years. And so this is serendipitous that it's all coming together right now. We've been applying for grants to try and study this for 4, 5, 6 years now. And so we're glad to be working on it now and get to overlap our efforts with UC Davis. So I appreciate my counterparts that have just presented. We work closely with Matt and Ingrid and Joel. So it's good to be sharing the time with them. So what I want to share with you is I want to do a quick high-level overview of the corridor improvements that we've identified through our plan. And so I will go through quickly the entire corridor just so you have the context. And then most pertinent to your community is Stockton and T intersection and some of the changes that we've identified there. These are all part of a plan. So we're not moving concrete, not breaking ground on new improvements right away. This is a planning, visioning effort that will be adopted or approved by council in the near future that we can then seek funding to make this a reality. So I want to put that into context as far as what the timeline. So our project goals, I want to just be clear, we're focused on traffic safety. If you've heard of Vision Zero, it's a city's goal to eliminate traffic-related deaths and fatalities by 2027. And Stockton Boulevard is one of the worst corridors in that regard. We need to improve safety first and foremost. We want to improve mobility. We want to work with and for the community when we envision these changes, and not just do this in our cubicles and then come out and say, hey, this is what we're doing. We really want to make sure that there's dialogue. So having said that, we did a ton of community engagement over the past 2 summers, both before and post pandemic, and got a lot of great information. To summarize this long list of things that we've heard from the community, if you're not a vehicle on Stockton Boulevard, people don't feel comfortable. If you're walking, if you're biking, if you're waiting for transit, it just doesn't feel comfortable on Stockton Boulevard. And then we know that the cars on Stockton Boulevard crash more frequently than almost every other corridor in the entire city. So that's the summation of this, what we've heard from the community. And we know that traffic is an issue. So we want to try and address as many of those things as possible. If we were to address every single one of them and try and optimize the walking environment, the street trees and lighting environment, get the buses in their own space so that they don't have to be stuck in traffic, get bikes their own great comfortable space, and then keep cars going freely, we would need a whole lot of space that we simply do not have. So we need to figure out what trade-offs we're going to make and be creative with our solutions. So we need to find solutions that work within the space that we have instead of the space that we would need if we were to accommodate every wish out there. So I'm going to take you through the draft designs that we have. And I'm going to go through it in 5 different segments. We broke down the corridor into 5 segments, and I'll move through, like I said, quickly. First, I'm going to show you what it looks like today. We call this a cross section. If you were to slice the street and look at it, we call it a cross section. All of these cross sections are looking north or northeast. And we're starting at the north end of the corridor. So looking first at Alhambra. This is what it looks like today. And the design in this one scenario, we actually are pushing forward 2 options that are both valid and valuable, and they'll be receiving further study. One of them has a 1-lane each direction configuration to provide space for a bike lane that doesn't exist today, or 2 northbound, or what we're calling northbound lanes, like a northeastbound lane, northwestbound, with 1 southbound lane. That's a possibility as well. So that's that section. From T Street to 2nd Avenue, this is your neck of the woods. This is what it currently exists: 2 northbound, 2 southbound lanes, and a center turn lane with no bike facilities at all. What we would be able to do is, by eliminating that center turn lane, and we are able to add a bike facility shared with pedestrians. So kind of just like almost like a walking trail that you would have, like American River Parkway or Sacramento River Trail, but up at the sidewalk level where bikes and pedestrians share that space. So a connection for bicycles that doesn't exist today. Again, a creative solution that may not be the red carpet that I would like to be able to provide, but it's a creative solution that we feel works for meeting the needs of everyone. This next section is right in front of Aggie Square, which we were all just talking about. And this is an opportunity to share a vision with Aggie Square and the development that's happening there. So this actually is the same kind of idea that I just showed you on the previous section, but a little bit nicer, because we're actually going to share some of our vision and some of our space with folks at Aggie Square. And so as they develop, some of this will be city property, some of this will hang over into Aggie Square frontage or property. And so an example of that is in the bottom left-hand corner, where you have a 2-directional bike facility, like a bike path, but then a separate sidewalk. And the only way that that's possible is if we can share that space with Aggie Square. So the key is the key to having good partnerships, to having that kind of success. So we appreciate them being willing to share that vision with us. Continuing south, Broadway to 21st Avenue, we have 2 lanes each direction today, and actually we have bike lanes for the first time in this segment existing today. But the traffic volumes are actually kind of low in this section comparatively. And this is a space where we can actually drop a lane in each direction and turn that outside lane into a bus bike shared lane. This is a solution that cities such as Portland and Boston are doing, or the suburbs of Boston rather, where buses have that lane for priority bus use, and they can travel without having to get in and out of traffic, and really speeds up the transit time. But also when the buses aren't there, it is a really wide bike lane. So when buses and bikes do have to pass one another, there's enough space to maneuver, and it works really well in these other cities. And in fact, the bicyclists feel more comfortable sharing that space with a trained and professional driver, unlike me or someone else that is just driving and perhaps being distracted by kids in the back seat or whatever else is happening. That even though it is it's not a dedicated bike lane, they share sometimes, that it is a level of comfort that actually works out pretty well, and that bicyclists are supportive of, and at least it's worked well in these other cities. And then the last section at the southern end, 2 northbound lanes, 2 southbound lanes, a center turn lane, and yes, there are bike lanes today. There isn't a lot to change down there other than adding street trees and improving the sidewalk environment. There's so much, the volume of traffic down there is just so high that we can't even really entertain in good faith any kind of reduction of travel lanes down there. So that's a quick overview. I want to jump into T Street though, because this is your neighborhood. T Street has always been something for the past 20 years. The city's wanted to try and figure out a little bit better, so this is our opportunity to do so. You know what it looks like, you know the configuration, you're familiar with it, but what I want to point out is over on the right-hand side of the screen, all those numbers and turning movements. That's what we do at the beginning of a study like this, is take counts. How many cars are turning left and right and going straight through the intersection? We take these counts at the peak period, so the AM peak and the PM peak, to capture when these turning movements or intersection movements are at the highest. And to no one's surprise, the right-hand turn movement from T Street then turning right onto Stockton Boulevard is really heavy in the morning. And then in the afternoon, the PM peak, heading northbound is really heavy. So we want to make sure that we address and accommodate that. And as we look at T Street is a great east-west bike connection throughout the entire city.
Mm-hmm.
But this ends up being kind of the weakest link in the chain. So we are taking a look at how can we improve this east-west bike connection, because this is really where it falls apart. So even though that the development right there, the Geo Apartments, has made some improvements to the bike lane on one side of the intersection, made some improvements to some of the signals and how it operates, there's still some improvements that we can address. So here we go. One, the big change that we're proposing to the intersection is prohibiting left-hand turn movements for folks traveling on T Street in either direction and making a left-hand turn onto Stockton. Prohibiting that turn movement, because that opens up so many possibilities to the operation and the safety of the whole intersection. So if you're traveling eastbound on T Street, making a left or a northbound movement, we're going to eliminate that. And then elimination of the mirrored image. So westbound T Street to southbound Stockton, eliminating that. And so what that would look like, I know I just showed you an engineer drawing, and that a little bit maybe hard to read. So hopefully this will be a little bit easier. We're looking kind of northbound toward the freeway in this angle. Here you can see, and imagine with me, no left-hand turn movements from T Street onto Stockton. So the cars that are heading east and westbound, there's one lane dedicated to a through lane, what we call, just going straight through, and then one lane completely dedicated to right-hand turns. Those are your two options. So being able to separate those, turn the straight movement from the right-hand turn movement, actually optimizes the traffic flow and optimizes the safety of the intersection. As you know, the angle of the intersection, because it's a diagonal coming through an otherwise grid section, like gridded streets where it's right-hand turns, and then you have Stockton that comes through at an angle, it creates this really sharp turn for these left-hand turns. So the eliminating left-hand turns improves safety because of vision of the drivers, and it improves the operation of the intersection itself. Real brief, you can see the little red dots here. These are bicyclists traveling through the intersection. Right now, you don't have a bike lane on this south side, or what would be the eastbound travel of the intersection for bicyclists. So being able to shift the lanes north just a little bit provides that space so you can take that bike lane all the way up to the intersection and provide a space for bicyclists to be up there and visible by those cars. We know that that's a heavy right-hand turn movement. And so we want to be able to get the bikes and pedestrians up in front of the vehicles to be visible so that right-hand turn movement, the right-hand turning vehicles can see them. And then if you go out there today and you travel across the intersection, there are two car lanes that really quickly merge into one, right there in front of that Starbucks. We wouldn't have a need for two receiving lanes, and it just becomes one vehicle receiving lane and one receiving bike lane. And so right now, the bicyclists kind of have to be scrappy and fight for your territory while cars are going through the intersection and then quickly merging down to one lane. Now it gives bikes a place to be received on the other side of the intersection, and likewise cars. So those are the big changes of the intersection right there. Again, all of this is in the name of safety and mobility of the operation. So let me zoom out just a tiny bit. So looking at T Street and Stockton, where would the cars go? So if you're heading westbound on T Street coming out of Elmhurst, heading westbound, and you want to make a left-hand turn to head south on Stockton, there would be signs directing you to do so on 39th Avenue to go down just a couple of blocks on 39th before jumping onto Stockton Boulevard. If you're heading eastbound on T Street and you're going onto the freeway or otherwise wanting to head north on Stockton Boulevard or northwest on Stockton Boulevard, you do that on 35th. And technically, that's actually how it's signed today underneath the freeway. I know nobody sees it and nobody abides by that, but that's how it's signed today. We would do some refreshing of those signs, figure out a way to make that more clear and apparent to really direct traffic onto 35th if you're heading northbound. There will also be a new signal we're proposing on the eastbound on-ramp right there, just north of the new apartments. There isn't a signal there, but we plan on putting one in there. Now, I know that when we talk about diverting more traffic through a neighborhood, that might make some people uncomfortable. I totally understand that. Going back to those traffic counts that I mentioned earlier, the traffic counts, I know it might be hard to see, but that left-hand turn movement that goes to the corner of T Street and Stockton and then turns south onto Stockton, that's 14 cars per hour. It's not a heavy movement. In fact, if you were just to observe it with just the naked eye test, it would seem almost like hardly anybody does it at all. So directing those 14 cars down onto 39th is not something that would be that impactful. And the afternoon numbers are even less. It was 6 cars per hour, and that's at the very peak. That's the busiest time of the day, is 6 cars per hour. In the afternoon, and then in the morning, 14 cars per hour. So we don't think that that will be a huge impact onto the streets, but we understand that it is some impact. And so we recognize that, but we feel like the safety benefits of the larger intersection of Stockton and T will serve everyone really, really well. I'm going to skip over this. This is an engineer drawing to show you that there are continual bike lanes underneath US 50. And I just want to share with you, we did traffic modeling to see how these impacts would play out. And so we modeled these types of impacts into a computer software program that says, if you pull this lever and make this change and do this, what's going to be the traffic impacts? If all of our changes that I proposed to you very briefly in the last 10 minutes were to happen, it has about a just under 2 minute increase of time from if you travel from the very south end to the north end of this stretch. And then southbound, it's about 1.5 minute increase. So again, we recognize that there are going to be increases of time and traffic and travel delay, but there's a lot of safety improvements that we get for that small increase of time. Moving forward, we will look for funding to make this a reality. Unfortunately, this plan doesn't come with a bag of money to implement it. So once it is approved by council, then the city would start working at searching for funding through grants and other means, mostly grants, to be able to fund some of these improvements. And over 4 miles of improvements is likely something that won't happen in one single project, but will probably be implemented bit by bit. If you want to stay involved in the conversation as it moves away from transportation, as we wrap up this part, and as the larger discussion of improvements along Stockton that aren't necessarily just transportation, the Community Development Department with the City of Sacramento is doing the Stockton Boulevard plan, and I encourage you to stay involved there. Our next steps for the transportation portion of it, though, we will wrap up these designs, have a public comment period of the entire month of March on our actual document where you can thumb through it and take a look at our assumptions and our recommendations and give us some feedback. We'll incorporate that feedback and take it to council for final approval in May. And that's all I have. I'm happy to field some questions and chat with you all for a little bit, but I know it's been a long meeting for you all. So if you don't want to ask the questions now, I'm going to put my information and this project website into the chat, so you can reach out to me after the fact if you would like.
One thing, Drew, thank you very much for your time. I'm just wondering, I know there's some questions here from folks that live over that would be very affected by that 39th Street change. So I don't know if we want to just take a couple questions about that or comments, and yes, and then we probably should wrap it up because, but really appreciate your coming. And I think this is something that we're going to want to have, more discussion and input into. That's it is pretty critical there. So I don't know, Deborah, did you want to make a comment? Deborah's a board member who lives down that area. I don't know if you can unmute her, Manuel. She unmuted.
Sorry, I also unmuted myself. I think she can unmute herself.
Okay. So Deborah, do you want to add anything here before we wrap up, and or Peggy, either one of you, because I know you both been working on this.
I think I successfully unmuted myself. Thank you. My main concern is that if we are getting the traffic turning off T Street down 39th towards Stockton now, since they won't be able to make that left-hand turn, in that area of 39th Street, frankly, from under Highway 50 to Stockton, there are a number of traffic speeding and other issues. Can or will that be looked at, some kind of traffic calming, especially since it looks like the traffic will be increased?
Great question. Right now, we had the speed lump program. I don't know, you may already be familiar with this, but that is something that you can even start today and ask our traffic investigators who I work with to come out and measure or record the speed of vehicles on the street. And if it qualifies and you get signatures from your neighbors that live on 39th, then that's something that doesn't have to wait for this plan at all. And we can get speed bumps or speed lumps on the streets in a quick manner. So that's something that's available now. And I'm happy, if you want to email me, I'm happy to get you in contact with the right people there. But certainly as part of this project, yes. But I just wanted to let you know that you didn't have to even wait for me to finish my efforts.
Yes, I would be interested in those. Contact the information. We have contacted some city folks before and they weren't very supportive, indicating that there were already some lumps on the from Folsom to S Street and they didn't think there was much to be done.
I'm not as familiar with the requirements. I know it has to meet some sort of engineering requirements. So I will defer to them, but I can certainly get you in contact with those people that are working on it currently.
That sounds good. Do you know anything other than those speed lumps that might be able to help with traffic and pedestrian safety in that portion of 39th Street?
As far as slowing down traffic, speed lumps right now is the only tool in our toolbox, but I am working on another project in the future to add to that toolbox. And I'm really excited about that because we want to have more options to offer you as residents other than just a speed lump, but other types of solutions to slow down vehicles in the neighborhoods. So I'm working on that and hopeful to have some new information shortly on that.
Great, that sounds good. Thank you.
I see a question about when we did the traffic counts. Yes, we did that before the pandemic. It was 2019, May of 2019, and then again in October of 2019. So all of our counts were pre-pandemic. Great idea from Amy about directional signage painted on the street. That is something that Caltrans does often, as you cite, and I will look into see if we are able to do that as a city. Sometimes Caltrans is able to do things that cities aren't able to do as far as traffic engineering rules. I'm a transportation planner. I'm not a traffic engineer. I work with a bunch of them, and they are very much a by the book kind of profession. And so if we're able to do it, I think that's a great idea. So we'll look into that.
Great. Thank you again, Peggy. Any last remarks?
No, thank you, Drew, so much for coming here and for staying so late for
Yeah,
your presentation. We really appreciate it.
No problem. You got me out of bedtime duty. I'm not a problem.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We know it was a long meeting, but I think we got a lot done and have more resources, and please, follow up if you still have questions. And I think with that, we'll wrap this up. So thank you.
Thank you, Maggie.
And thank all the presenters. So I think you can